During last week's pardon wars between the Biden family and Dr. Fauci and the January 6ers and more, Trump issued a major group of pardons that are just as significant, but maybe got a little lost in the mix, or maybe I just failed to notice with everything else going on. But he pardoned nearly 24 anti-abortion protesters convicted and imprisoned in recent years for actions at abortion clinics across the country.
They should not have been prosecuted. Many of them are elderly people. This is a great honor to sign this.
And these are all cases involving not just protesting outside a clinic, but actually entering or blocking access. Well, yeah, so a crime, you might think. What right do these people have to invade those places? Yeah, there are criminal elements in all of these cases, but the themes of January 6th apply here, too. There can be a low-level crime committed, and the way it's prosecuted can still be supremely harsh and corrupt. These activists are part of several groups that held similar actions at abortion clinics all across the country. Washington, D.C., suburban Nashville, suburban Detroit, New York City, and more. The most high-profile case is the one in D.C., and the group involved there is something of a unicorn politically. Often when we think anti-abortion or pro-life protesters, we think religious right, but apparently not in this case, though I'm not completely clear on the members' faith perspectives. But this group is called Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising. If you visit their website, you'll find pro-life messaging right there alongside Black Lives Matter promotion and transgender advocacy and more things we'd usually associate with the other side of the issue, which does actually make some sense. If Black Lives Matter, nothing is taking more black lives than the abortion clinics in volumes the racist cops will never match. This group is based and active in Washington, D.C., which has put them in conflict with the Washington Surgery Clinic, an abortion provider in the northwest part of the city. The group even claims to have recovered illegal late-term aborted fetuses from the clinic's waste disposal, which is an important and undercovered story on its own, though not actually legally relevant in this particular case.
We looked at the boxes that were sitting on the dolly on the sidewalk. They both had labels on them that said Washington Surgery Clinic.
They say the driver was shocked when they told him what might be inside the boxes.
They said, "Would you get in trouble if we took one of these boxes?" And he thought about it for a second and he said, okay.
Inside, they say they found dozens of plastic containers.
We took 115 unborn children out of the box.
Most were very small, but farther down they say there were bigger containers.
The group wants an investigation, but unsurprisingly, D.C. police and their Fed friends say nothing to see here.
D.C. police say the fetuses were aborted in accordance with D.C. law. Sources say there are no plans to autopsy them.
But these activists were not arrested and imprisoned for intercepting those packages. In this case, they were arrested and imprisoned for occupying that same clinic a year and a half prior, October 2020. One of the group's leaders, Lauren Handy, made an appointment at the clinic using a false name, and the group then used that appointment as a pretense to enter the clinic. Once inside, they occupied the waiting room and blocked the door with their bodies, furniture, chains, and ropes. They live-streamed their entire action as well. The group was obviously physical, but at least in the video I've seen, there's no instance of them attacking anyone. The only injury reported in the incident was a nurse with a sprained ankle. The action lasted a couple hours until police removed the activists and arrested them. According to prosecutors, that obstruction prevented 2 patients from entering the clinic, including one who was in labor. Unclear what the exact circumstances were. Hopefully not the Ralph Northam special, but of course, delivering healthy babies is not a service this clinic advertises. For her action there, Lauren Handy was sentenced last year to 5 years in prison, prosecuted federally by Merrick Garland's Justice Department. She had 9 co-defendants, all of whom were convicted and sentenced to shorter terms. The other events included in Trump's pardon were very similar. Outside Nashville in 2021, 24 people occupied an abortion clinic and sang Christian songs to honor the lost lives.
And lives that death may die. Hallelujah. Crown him the Lord of peace.
And yeah, there was some stunt work to it. That old woman in the wheelchair was blocking the door.
I'm not killing the baby, I promise you.
Is this the clinic? Is this the clinic?
But don't worry, they got that elderly menace convicted, though they spared her prison time, just 3 years probation if she survives to serve that out. Now, as far as I've seen, the only instances of injury or violence in all of these cases are that sprained ankle, though I haven't seen the cause specified. And in one case, Bevelyn Williams, a Tennessee activist included in this Trump pardon, crushed a clinic staff member's hand in a door while attempting to block access to a New York City abortion facility. So again, are these cases trespassing? Certainly. Are there perhaps low-level assaults involved? It seems so. Could you consider these cases harassment? Yeah, you probably could. The concern with these prosecutions is not that everything these protesters did is legally fine, or that these clinics or their personnel or their patients aren't entitled to the same legal protections that anybody else is. The concerns are two. Number one, why is any of this the federal government's business? And number two, why are federal prosecutors seemingly exclusively concerned with policing only one side of this conflict? To the first point, why is this Merrick Garland and Company jurisdiction anyway? If I go to any other place of business, a restaurant, a gas station, a grocery store, and I start protesting, and I obstruct, and I'm asked to leave private property, and I don't, and maybe I even get a little physically aggressive with my interaction. All of that is a matter for local and state police to handle. My district attorney is going to charge me. I'll go on trial in my state court system. Why are these cases federal? In general, the Justice Department charged these activists for two things: conspiring against civil rights, implicitly the right to an abortion, though that is not a constitutional right anymore, but I guess it was at the time of the protest, and violation of the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, or the FACE Act, a 90s-era law passed in response to crimes committed against abortion clinics in the decades prior after the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision. And that law does make prohibitions that clearly happened in these cases. You can't physically obstruct people from accessing an abortion clinic, and these activists did that on video. The argument is not that the law was misapplied as written. The argument is that the law has no legal basis to exist. Remember, constitutionally, per the 10th Amendment, police power belongs to the states. Where the federal government does not have expressly delegated power, it's up to the states to handle. The federal government has no special constitutional authority over medical clinics, if these even are medical clinics anyway. Now, if Tennessee or Michigan or New York want to prosecute these cases under their own laws, fine. But the federal government is claiming legitimate legal authority where it in fact has none. And yeah, one of these cases is a DC case, but that's not why the feds handled it. The point is, the feds would have claimed the same jurisdiction if it was Washington State instead of Washington, D.C. But let's say we grant legitimate federal jurisdiction here, maybe because of all the federal money in medicine, even though there's not supposed to be any federal money in abortion, or whatever other reason. The other problem here is what sure looks a lot like selective prosecution. The FACE Act, for all of its faults, at least in my opinion, is at least politically neutral. It says no obstructing or damaging reproductive health care facilities, which includes abortion clinics and crisis pregnancy centers, which counsel women away from abortion, as well as places of worship, which are commonly explicitly pro-life. Because for all the cases of obstructive abortion clinic protests, there are potentially multiples more in attacks on pro-life organizations. In just the second half of 2022 alone, after Roe v. Wade was overturned, a pro-life group counted over 100 pro-life organizations hit with vandalism, threats, obstructive protests, or other actions prohibited by the FACE Act, all of which are itemized with links for reference so you can vet them. Now, granted, that count comes from an activist organization with its own agenda in the matter, and since some of these cases are mysterious unsolved vandalism, they certainly could be hoaxes. But even if some of these cases aren't exactly what they appear to be, is there any serious doubt that the true count of pro-life obstruction or attacks versus pro-choice obstruction or attacks is something more balanced than 97-3? Which is the DOJ's own statistic for their FACE Act prosecutions. 97% of the charges are against pro-life people. 3% are against pro-choice, since the FACE Act became law in 1994. Senator Mike Lee asked then Attorney General Merrick Garland about that disparity in 2023, and Merrick Garland's straight-faced response was that the attacks on pro-life facilities are under the cover of darkness.
In 2022 and for the first couple of months of 2023, DOJ has announced charges against 34 individuals for blocking access to or vandalizing abortion clinics. There have been over 81 reported attacks on pregnancy centers, 130 attacks on Catholic churches, and only 2 individuals have been charged. So how do you explain this disparity?
You're quite right. There are many more prosecutions with respect to the blocking of the abortion centers, but that is generally because those actions are taken with photography at the time, during the daylight, and seeing the person who did it is quite easy. Those who are attacking the pregnancy resources centers, which is a horrid thing to do, are doing this at night in the dark.
Yeah, so if January 6th had happened after sundown, they all would have got away with it, I'm sure. The DOJ has no capability after nightfall, and yet federal agents still raid the homes of these pro-life activists at night. So why is this amazing technology suddenly available when not just nocturnally, but politically convenient? For all of those reasons, there is a push in Congress to repeal the FACE Act. It does have good support in the House. Perhaps it could pass there, but it would still have to get through the Senate, where it would be subject to filibuster. And don't count on Democrats to surrender on their most important issue, the industrial fetal harvest and the imprisonment of all who threaten it. But it's probably a moot point anyway, at least for now, if it's not prosecuted the way it has been for the last 4 years. Yes, FACE Act prosecution should be something closer to 50-50 if they are prosecuted, but that's just it. Closer to 0-0 is better yet. Let the states police their own problems and keep the DOJ limited in its proper role. It's not always a perfect solution, of course, but it is a question of the risk that you're willing to accept. If you have to pick between a rogue federal government imprisoning its enemies or the inconvenience of walking around a grandma in a wheelchair while she sings about Jesus, well, one of these is actually a much greater threat than the other. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on X, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are live on Wednesday and Sunday nights. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.